Taylor Elwood here, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm going to talk about the topic of anger and how I'm changing my relationship with anger as a result of all the work that I'm doing. I think that in general, men are really uncomfortable, or actually are really comfortable feeling anger. Let me rephrase that. That's the one acceptable emotion that men are allowed to feel. But I'll admit that in my own relationship with anger, I have not been comfortable feeling it. When I was growing up, I was basically, anytime I expressed any emotion, I was shut down by my dad and by my stepmom. And so I learned early on to bottle up my anger and my rage. The problem is that this came out in passive-aggressive ways in my life and in my relationships. And, it'd come out with, passive-aggressive comments. It might come out in actions where I would act out my anger. It would come out in ways where it was not appropriate or healthy for myself or anyone else. And, I can give myself some grace for that, because the fact of the matter is that we're not taught how to handle anger very well. I mean, my experience of anger early on was my dad being a volcano, just blowing up and yelling and sometimes hitting, and that being the expression of anger that was there. And I didn't want to be like that. Or it was my stepmom grabbing me by the arms and shaking me violently while yelling at me. Even with my mom, my experience of anger was, her being cold and withdrawn. That was the safest form of anger that I learned, and that was the anger that I ended up gravitating toward, because I didn't want to be like my dad, and I didn't want to be like my stepmom. I certainly didn't want to do anything physical with that expression of anger. And I was afraid of what I would do if I allowed myself to feel anger. So I would get cold and withdrawn. And this is something that I did it as a safety mechanism for myself, but also as a safety mechanism for other people. And I thought that this was the way to handle anger. The problem is that being cold and withdrawn isn't really effective. It just creates a lot of resentment and the storing up of that anger. And then at some point, sometimes I would blow up like a volcano and get really angry. Or I would push people away because I learned, because I'd be like, well, I'm so angry that I have to push them away. Or I would direct that anger toward myself, because I was like, well, at least if I'm directing it at myself, then I'm safer. And it's safer than anyone else. And if I'm beating up on myself, maybe that person will like me. And that was my codependent behavior, where I was trying to get the approval of someone else and hoping that by showing anger toward myself, maybe those other people would forgive me or whatever else. And a lot of times what I wasn't doing is I wasn't expressing my anger toward those people. I wasn't expressing my anger in healthy ways. A big part of this, and I've realized this over the last few months, is really I hadn't learned how to be assertive. So a huge part of this work, of this men's work, and really just this work in general, is that we have to learn how to feel our emotions. Because men have been taught to push down and repress their emotions. They've been taught to lock away their sensitive hearts and to basically push down their sensitivity and try to be rough and tough and not show that anything affects them, when in fact everything affects them. And as a man, what I've really learned is that when men are given the space and the permission to feel, I see some of the deepest, most tender moments of my life that I've ever seen. I see men crying as they connect with each other. I see men expressing anger. I see men expressing other feelings, fear and anxiety and things like that, things that we're told we're not allowed to feel, but which we all feel. And what I really wanted you to know is that it is acceptable to feel all of these emotions. It's acceptable to feel anger. It's acceptable to feel fear, anxiety, sadness, happiness, and joy, and all the other emotions that are available. But when we learn that we're not allowed to feel emotions, that we're that big boys don't cry, and that or we learn that the only acceptable display is anger, and that even then, like, how do we display that acceptably? That's where we have to do our healing. Speaking as a man, I think that one of the things that I've always been terrified the most of with my anger is, if I express this towards somebody, will I lose that person? Will that person end up out of my life? And it's a very valid and real fear. And yet, ironically enough, what's happened is that I have lost people. I have abandoned people because I stored all that anger and I directed it toward myself, and yet I still was angry at them. I still resented them. And so I've pushed people away in my life. And I'm still learning, at the time of this video, I'm still learning how to express my anger in a way that feels safe and healthy for me, and at the same time let someone else know what it is that I'm feeling. I've been reading this book called Radical Honesty, and I read the chapter on anger, and one of the things he said is that, you're probably not going to do this, but he's like, you're probably not going to go and say to somebody, here's all the ways that I resent you, because resentment is a form of anger. But he said, but even if you can admit it to yourself, that's healthier than anything else. And so I did it. I wrote down this list of everything that I resented, other people in my life for. And it was one of the healthiest releases of anger that I had felt in a long time, because even if I wasn't going to tell them, I was telling myself. Another exercise that I did was an exercise where it's like, what conversations am I not having today? And again, the point here isn't that you're going to necessarily have those conversations, but even writing it out and admitting, like, here's the conversations I'm not having, gets you to start looking at, like, here's the things that I'm keeping in that I know I need to express, but I'm not expressing them. And that's really important. So when we look at our feelings of anger and the fact that we have anger, it is actually really important and healthy to allow ourselves to express that feeling of anger, to express the emotions that we feel. But sometimes we don't feel like we can. So that's where, even if we can just express it to ourselves and we can write it out or do something like that, that can be a healthy approach to feeling the emotions that we are feeling. What I want to do is I want to encourage you to open yourself up to the possibility that the feelings that you have, whether it's anger or sadness or anything like that, that you have a right to express them. Again, another book that I'm reading right now is called If I Say No, I'll Make Them Unhappy, or something like that. It's a really interesting book. It's like 1975, but it's a book about assertive communication. And what I've discovered is that as I've been reading the book, and as I've been reading some other books, and then implementing the practices, I've become more and more assertive. And I've become less and less angry because I'm not storing that anger up. Where before I was storing the anger up, now I'm speaking out more frequently and openly, and I'm sharing in the moment what it is that I'm feeling. And so as a result, I'm not storing away all that anger that I was feeling before. I'm not poisoning myself internally. I'm not allowing myself to kind of hold on to something that doesn't feel healthy for me. And that's kind of the biggest lesson that I can offer here, is that when we hold on to our emotions, when we push them down and we repress them and keep them in, we're doing ourselves a disservice, and we're also doing the people in our lives a disservice, because we're not being honest with ourselves, and we're certainly not being honest with them. If I'm not being honest about the emotions that I'm feeling with anyone else, I'm certainly not able to be honest with anyone else about the emotions that I'm feeling. And it is scary to express anger. I mean, I got out of a relationship recently where I didn't do a good job at expressing anger. And if I had, I wonder what would have happened differently. I don't know, because I was scared. I was a people pleaser. I'm a recovering people pleaser. I'm a recovering nice guy. I'm working on changing these behaviors, and I will probably be working on changing them for the rest of my life, because, like I said, I learned early on, you're not allowed to express anger. If you express anger, then you get punished. You get beat. You get yelled at. You get told what a disappointment you are. All these other things. And what I wasn't given was, hey, you can express what you're feeling. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get what you want or anything like that, but you can express what you're feeling and actually have someone hold space with you. So I'm learning that now more so than ever, and I'm learning it by becoming more assertive. I'm learning it by really just pushing myself to become a different person than I ever have been. And is it terrifying at times? Yes, it is. I remember I had a new roommate move in with me, and in the first week he was leaving the light on in the kitchen, and it annoyed me. But I didn't say anything at first, because I was like, I don't want to make waves. And I started to feel a bit of resentment, and I used the exercise of, what conversations am I not having? And so I wrote out, I'm not having conversation with my roommate about this. And I was like, and what's the result? The result is that I'm starting to resent my roommate. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't even know this guy that well. We're just getting to know each other, and I don't want to start this relationship off on the wrong foot. So I said to him, I'd like you to turn off the kitchen light. I've been turning it off for you because you leave it on, and I'd like you to turn it off. He said, okay. And it was one of the most interesting experiences for me, because it was suddenly like, oh, it's okay for me to express something that I want and need and do it in a healthy way. Like, there wasn't any, like, hey, turn off that damn light or anything. No, I didn't do that or anything like that, but it just, I want you to turn off that light. And he did. It was as simple as that. He started turning off the light, and any resentment I felt just dissipated. It was a really healing and a transformative experience for me, and it was a good lesson for me that what I don't express takes on a life of its own. And it takes on a life of its own in relationship to the person that I'm not expressing it to. It takes on a life of its own in terms of the stories that I'm telling myself. It takes on a life of its own in ways that is ultimately toxic and harmful in regards to having genuine, healthy relationships. And this is something that, as I'm realizing this, I'm practicing it more and more, because I'm like, okay, moving forward, I have to change this. Like, I can't change what happened in the past. I didn't communicate assertively. I didn't speak up when something bothered me. I didn't, or I would speak up sometimes, but I would end up ultimately a lot of times just kind of whimpering and rolling over, because that's what I'd learned as a codependent nice guy. I'm not allowed to have my own feelings and experiences. I'm not allowed to have my needs and wants. I'm not allowed to have something valued and to be respected for it. That's what I learned, but that's not accurate. I am allowed to have my needs and wants. I am allowed to feel what I want. I am allowed to express those things. Does it mean that I'm going to automatically get my needs and wants met? No. Does it mean that the person's automatically going to agree with everything that I say? No. There's going to be some rejection. There's going to be some disapproval. There's going to be some things that but I also don't have to let it bother me that much. Like, it's like, I don't need your approval. We can agree to disagree. We can agree that what I want and what you want are two different things, and we can part ways. Or we can find a workable compromise that at least allows us to have some kind of relationship, but it may not be the relationship that either of us originally envisioned. So these are things that are really important to think about in relationship to our experience and expression of emotions. So this podcast was really supposed to be about, expressing anger, right? And I am, and my experiences of anger, it is changing. I am becoming more and more assertive. I am becoming less angry. I'm becoming more confident in myself because I'm like, well, I know what I want. And I'm going to speak up for it. And I'm going to value and respect myself instead of hoping that somebody else pats me on the head and says, good boy or attaboy. And maybe you can have what you want. Maybe not. But it's not up to you whether or not you get it or not. I don't ever want to do that again. It's not healthy behavior. It's not affirming behavior. So I want you to think about this in relationship to your own life because it's really important that you allow yourself to have your expressions. You are allowed to feel anger. You are allowed to feel sad. You are allowed to feel all the things that you feel. And it's also important to remember that just because you feel anger or you feel resentment doesn't mean that you are angry or are resentment. It's not, your identity is not that emotion. But the expression of the emotion is a release of that emotion from your identity. And I think this is really important. If I don't want to be an angry person, then I need to learn how to express my anger in the moment. And yes, maybe I will get rejected. Yes, maybe the person that I'm with will decide I don't want to be with this person or whatever. And yet, that might be the most honest and best experience of my life because at least I'm not settling for less. At least I'm not continuing to put up with situations that where my boundaries are getting crossed. Because anger is really fundamentally about boundaries getting crossed. If I'm angry about something, it's because someone is crossing my boundaries in some form or manner, or someone is doing something that I don't like, or someone isn't behaving a certain way. A lot of times anger is about control as well. So it's not just about boundaries. Sometimes it's, I'm angry at this person because he's not doing what I want him to do. Well, guess what? You don't get to control other people. So it's important to let go of that attachment. And sometimes that is done through the expression of anger, but done in a healthy way. And it doesn't mean that you have to throw a temper tantrum, stomp around the house, talk out loud, and yell at somebody, or throw things, or break stuff, or behave in other ways that are inappropriate. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means, hey, I feel resentment towards you right now. I feel resentment towards you for X, Y, and Z. Okay. Well, what can I do about that? Maybe nothing. Or maybe something. I don't know. That's where it opens the floor to conversation. And ideally, conversation where both people are heard and respected and appreciated. And at the same time, neither one feels like they're getting walked all over. So this is the experience that I'm having as I continue working on my own emotion around anger and my relationship with it. I'm really excited to see where this goes. And I wanted to share this with you today so that it could help you. If you're a man or a woman watching this video and you're like, oh, hey, I could use some help, feel free to click on the site below or the link in the show notes and reach out to me. Especially if you're a man doing this work, I'm here for you. I'm doing a lot of men's work. But regardless, I'm happy to help anyone out with it. It's honestly one of the most important things that we can do is learn how to communicate and really be 100% transparent and honest. Again, speaking as a recovering nice guy, I will fully admit this is something I'm working on every day. And I'm probably going to be working on it the rest of my life. All right, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great rest of your day and talk soon.